Greetings. My name is Christopher Whetten, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to present at the 2021 BYU Religious Education Student Symposium. My presentation is called Covenants or Commandments, the Primacy of Kantian Autonomy in Christian Thought, and it's all about how we know what is good. For Christians in general, and Latter-day Saints specifically, the answer seems clear. As Alma said, whatsoever is good cometh from God. But are things only good because God has made them to be good? Or do they have a goodness all of their own? More specifically, is God good by nature only? This is ontological goodness. Or good by choice? This is autonomous goodness. On this topic, there are two primary competing theories about goodness. The first is divine command theory. Put simply, divine command theory is the belief that all moral truth originates intrinsically within God. Because of this, humans can trust that what God says is good is truly good, because God has said it, He is perfectly good, and He created and determined all goodness. This theory is deeply associated with creation ex nihilo, where God decides the goodness of each aspect of creation. In divine command theory, there is no such thing as an independent objective morality for individuals, nations, or even humanity as a whole. Instead, human morality is always inherently dependent upon divine morality. While an individual or a nation may receive partial truths through rationality, revelation is required to receive the fullness of the eternal laws of God. In contrast to this, there is an entire spectrum of autonomy theories. At their heart, autonomy theories teach that God is moral because he has consciously chosen to be moral by adhering to moral truth. This concept is deeply interconnected with the principle of creation ex materia, because the goodness of the material universe exists independently of and prior to any interaction from God. Instead, God recognizes the good within pre-existing materials and deliberately chooses to organize, magnify, and share these principles of goodness. It's important to take a step back here and realize what's at stake before we get too into the weeds about all of this. After all, these theories both have a lot in common. In both of them, there is such a thing as objective goodness, and God is perfectly, wonderfully good. However, these theories differ greatly in what it means for us to be good. For divine command theorists, humans are either created good or evil, depending on the theologian you ask. And from that point, morality consists of receiving and adhering to moral directions from God, often in the form of commandments. A key word associated with this theory is obedience, because obedience to God's commandments is what makes a person good. For autonomy theorists, humans are created neutral with the capacity to choose between both good and evil, and morality consists of actively seeking out, participating in, and receiving this pre-existing goodness. A key word associated with this theory is accountability, because humans are accountable for the moral choices that they take upon themselves. From this, we see that while both divine command theory and autonomy theories provide a foundation for objective divine goodness, they differ greatly with regards to the nature of God, the nature of goodness, and the nature of a good Christian. But how do we determine which of these two theories is true? By nature, there's not really scientific empirical evidence we can turn to when it comes to debates about the nature of God. Despite this, I believe that there are reasons to believe that God has deliberately chosen to be good and that he wants us to choose to be good for ourselves as well. Latter-day Saint theologian B.H. Roberts presented a model of deity that is deeply bound by pre-existing truths and limited in their omnipotence. He wrote, "Not even God may place himself beyond the boundary of space, nor on the outside of duration, nor is it conceivable to human thought that he can create space or annihilate matter. These are things that limit even God's omnipotence. What, then, is meant by the ascription of the attribute omnipotence to God? Simply that all that may or can be done by the power conditioned by other eternal existences duration, space, matter, truth, justice, God can do, but even he may not act out of harmony with the other eternal existences which condition or limit even him. This description of God is clearly subject to external factors like the laws of physics and the constraints of truth. Yet he remains rationally free to develop and choose his own autonomous moral code. This is exactly the kind of deity required for autonomy theory, where goodness already exists and people are accountable to choose for themselves what to do with that goodness. My next question is, are there any clues in the scriptures about the kind of moral code that God has chosen to build and follow? I've done my best to try and simplify the foundation of God's moral code into three interconnected principles upon which all the commandments and covenants seem to rest. These three are integrity, respect for autonomy and agency, and love. I want to talk a bit more about each of these because I think they provide a good foundation for followers of God who are seeking to build and maintain their own moral codes. First, integrity. The Old and New Testaments clearly present a God who is faithful to his word, keeps all of his covenants, and holds sacred the promises that he makes. As it says in Deuteronomy, he is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations. Second, autonomy. It is clear through Scripture that God exercises restraint in order to preserve the autonomy and agency of his children. While there are instances of divine intervention, by and large, God seems to allow for a system of choices and consequences, even when that allows evil to prosper and the righteous to suffer for a season. Third, love. All interactions with God bear witness to his perfect, unending, unselfish love for his children. My personal favorite witness of this was given by John, who wrote, "Let us love one another, for love is from God, and whoever loves has been born of God and knows God. Anyone who does not love does not know God, for God is love." Fittingly, John then bridged the gap between this example of divine benevolence and a mortal application of this principle when he said, "If God so loved us, we also ought to love one another." I want to make the same jump that John made, from talking about the character and attributes of God's moral code to recognizing what our own character should be. This is the most important part of my message today, a theory of metaethics that I like to call divine command theory because of its emphasis on the promises that we form with other people and with God. Divine command theory is like autonomy theory in that there are pre-existing truths out there in the universe for us to discover, adhere to, and incorporate into our moral codes, and that any rational intelligence can discover and learn from, like the law of physics or the principles of cause and effect. However, in divine covenant theory, in addition to these pre-existing truths, there are also moral truths that God has chosen to create, by which we are subject, including the principles of justice and mercy. Beyond these pre-existing principles, additional moral obligations are assumed as individuals covenant with each other and with God to assume these moral responsibilities and to create new truths. Our role then as moral agents under divine covenant theory is that we have been blessed with the ability to freely choose for ourselves between good and evil, and we must recognize pre-existing truths, willfully and deliberately choose to embrace the good with real intent, and then create new truths through this covenant-making process. I think an example is in order to illustrate how we can create new moral truth through the covenants that we make with others. To demonstrate this, I would like to turn to the world of fanny packs. I absolutely love my fanny pack, and I love to wear it out and about on Fridays for what I call a fanny pack Friday. I think you and I can both agree that there's no moral significance to wearing a fanny pack, and that when it comes to the weightier matters of the law, fanny pack Fridays would not be included in the most important temple covenants. However, let's say that you're my friend and you want to try out Fanny Pack Fridays. So on Thursday, you make a pinky promise with me that we're both going to wear our fanny packs and take a picture together. Then, when Friday comes around and we meet up, you're wearing your most garish, wonderful fanny pack, and I'm not wearing mine. Here's the question: have I sinned by failing to maintain my end of the promise on wearing a fanny pack this Friday? In divine covenant theory, and I believe in the eyes of God, I have. Because what just happened? Two rational beings with the power to choose made a promise and assumed an obligation to one another, and then I didn't uphold my end of the promise. This might still seem like a little thing, but in breaking my promise, I have wronged you, and I may have even hurt you, and that is not such a little thing. Fanny Pack Fridays may be small, but the promises that we make to each other are not. They're what bind us together and enable trust and love to flourish. If I, on a happier note, transitioning out of this sad example, if I've kept my promise, then you and I have created a new moral truth out of Fanny Pack Fridays, and I don't think there's anything cooler than that. I want to make it very clear that this type of morality building is a process rather than a destination. It's a journey that will require a lifetime, and I submit far beyond one lifetime. It's a constant alignment of our chosen pole stars of pre-existing truth with the principles that we hold and the righteous judgments and experiences that we make. This process is similar to what philosopher John Rawls described as reflective equilibrium. As we participate in this process, the key phrase is reevaluation through constant revelation. We're always going to have new experiences, changing relationships, and new knowledge. And because of this, our moral obligations will change and evolve through time. And that's a good thing. Divine covenant theory is flexible because it's autonomous. No two people will have the same moral code because no two people will have the same lived experience. And what an exciting blessing and a privilege that is. When thinking about morality building in divine covenant theory, I like to remember the Apostle Paul. In his day, he taught that the law of Moses was a schoolmaster given to ancient Israel in order to lead them to an internalized higher law of moral truth that would be exemplified by the coming Messiah. I think all written instances of divine morality constitute schoolmasters, given to followers of God in every age of the world in order to help us reach the type of internalized moral code that we are meant to. It is crucial to our personal, moral, and spiritual development to recognize that God does not intend us to be under a schoolmaster forever. Instead, he wants us to choose to personally develop the habits of morality that will lead to both internal and external righteousness. In the end, it's only through this process of rational, autonomous morality building that we can truly receive Christ's promise that we shall eventually be whole, even as our Father in heaven is whole. Thank you.